Okay, folks, we continue in the 25th letter. And today we're going to have a, so to speak, a full structure or a complete idea of everything that we spoke until the beginning. Tomorrow we'll bring it into the original questions and issues. Yesterday we spoke about the divine side of things, the divine soul, and how the divine soul is not a creation of God, it's a part of God. And therefore, when we do good, motivated by the divine soul, because you could do good, not motivated by the divine soul, we'll speak a little about that. It's about being bound up and connected to God. It's about doing what God needs from me rather than what benefit I have. Not to say that there isn't a benefit in doing good. Of course there is, no question. I'm talking about the motivation. Absolutely. So just as there is a holy side to the world, which is not so simple and easy to get to, even though it's there, there is zelumazeh. God creates the opposite. The opposite God creates from the holy side. And in the divine realm, that's called 10 crowns of impurity. Just as there are 10 divine attributes of God, and there's 10 powers of the soul to the divine soul, likewise, there's 10 crowns, 10 powers that are impure. Now, why are they called crowns? Because each one wants to be a king. Impurity begins with a sense of separateness from your source, sense of specialness of me, and therefore not making space for another. That's on a human level. On the spiritual level, similarly, that's actually where it comes from. So 10 crowns, it's sort of like the chesed wants to be the king. Kindness wants to be the king. Well, on the other side of kindness is gvura. Right? Power, strength. It wants to be the king. Compassion wants to be the king. And that's all of the attributes want to control. They want to be it. Exclusionary of others. So inclusionary is the way of holiness because it makes room for gvura, for compassion, and so on and so forth. But on the unholy side, it's not that way. No space for the other. Now, this is the idea of klipa. Klipa, as we explained, is a shell that covers on the holy spark that animates, because ultimately there's only God that animates everything. However, it's an exile. So when we speak in general terms, we spoke about the nations of the world, right? If you remember the patron angels and so on, we spoke in previous class last week. Animates. So this is then nations of the world where they get their vitality from. In other words, in a general manner, you could choose not to get it from such a place, but the natural vitality of animating souls, nations of the world, is from this place of separateness. With this, then, the Alter Rebbe explains, we can understand what it says by King Solomon, that evil man has dominion over holy man, ultimately to the detriment of evil man. What does that mean? It means the powers of negativity, the powers of darkness, of a klipa, of this negative force, has the power over holy man, which this represents the Jewish people as a collective whole. Therefore, in exile, in the times that we're now, the last 2,000 years, we've been dominated by nations of the world. Ultimately leads to their detriment. But in the moment, it doesn't seem that way. And the Alter Rebbe explains this is really a mystery, because this is the idea of the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God that's in exile. Again, the klipa, that's the shell that covers over on the divine spark that animates. And therefore it empowers negative forces to have power, control, wealth. And that's why the nations of the world dominate the Jewish people. In a way, even with the land of Israel, the last 70 years, it's still that way. Because whatever America says, I don't know, whatever, maybe that's changing a little bit as we're getting closer to Mashiach. But, not truly free. Not under the dominion of any other forces of the other nations. Even that's the case today. Now, why God would do such a thing to allow his divine presence and therefore the Jewish people to be dominated in such a way is a very good question, an extensive one that needs to be understood, but this is the fact. This is the reality. Now, that's about the nations of the world and dominance, right? That's what exile means. And therefore, the ways of the evil prosper. Again, in a temporary manner, in the moment, so to speak. Ultimately not, it's to their detriment. But in the moment, there seems to be something prospering, like power, like wealth, and the like. Ultimately, God does this in order that in exile, there is the divine spark that is captured in the klipa, that through our efforts we need to extricate, uplift, and raise into holiness. That's what we're here for. And then through that, we also help the nations of the world to extricate themselves in that respect. And that's why the Jewish people are the light unto nations. I'm actually going a little off from what the Alter Rebbe, he doesn't go on to this point, but in other places he does. And that's what it means to light unto the nations, that we have that duty to help them to bring out from the klipa, right? So the general world is a force of klipa that needs to be extricated, the spark of holiness that's there, and the things that we can uplift, raise up, and bring into the realm of holiness. Ultimately, the entire world will be shaped by that, and that's what Mashiach means, and including the nations of the world. So that is what we're hearing. That's what it means. And that's the concept of klipa, that God even allows himself to go into exile himself, the divine presence of God, in order that we should partner with him to fulfill ultimately his desire of changing the world for good, redeeming the world, taking darkness, klipa, and transforming it into holiness. Now, that again, that's the Alter Rebbe is in dealing with this issue over here, because that's the point that we want to bring out over here, is the negative forces. And the same thing is, for Jewish people, having also the opposite of the divine soul, having an animal soul that is also from klipa, negative force. And what our challenge is, of course, is that we are, and this is the first part of Tanya, the first 53 chapters, is that there's a engaged battle between being motivated by your godly soul to do for heaven's sake, to do for goodness sake, as opposed to doing something that is just self-motivated. Even if it's good, even if it's being charitable, just, makes me feel good. That's a motivation from the animal soul. Just to do good because I want to do the good. I gain from it. And not to say that there isn't a gain. The question is, what's the motivation? That's not a godly motivation. That's human. Human, by definition, means klipa. Because human means there's me and my agenda. Me and what I want. I want good. Hey, we're talking about good people, we're only talking to good people over here, right? So we all want good. We all want good. But it's the good that I want. Rather, and then, which means that that's a motivation coming from the animal soul. Again, in the animal soul, there's a good element of it. But you haven't refined yourself. You haven't elevated. You haven't extricated that part in you that's in exile. But when motivated by the divine soul to do good, because that's what God needs from me. That's my mission. That's what God put me here for. That's what he needs from me. A different ring to it. Then, with that, I do it ultimately because that's what God wants from me. That's what he needs from me. I give him pleasure. That doesn't mean we don't enjoy it. That doesn't mean we don't do it with simcha, with joy. Absolutely. What greater joy can you have than knowing that this is giving joy to God? Think about it, folks. Just even on a human level, just to give you a metaphor for this. What greater joy is there than giving joy to others, right? You having joy for yourself is limited. But when you give it to others, boy, is it much more powerful for you even. Now, when you really mean it for others, then it's amazing. So, same ideas over here. When you really, even your prayers, in order to give pleasure to God. Your charity, that this is giving divine satisfaction. It doesn't mean to exclude that you're also, that you're feeling good about it, but that's not what your motivation is, or at least that's not what you're thinking. Maybe that's a part of it, to go into our subconscious is not the point, and to be nitpicking on ourselves, don't go there either. Just, we should try to train ourselves to do it for a higher purpose. Now, all of this that I'm just explaining is really not part of today's class, because what the Alter Rebbe is just explaining over here is the negative forces are the divine presence of God, the Shekhinah, that God, in a mysterious, mystical manner, puts himself there. Think about it. Really makes himself vulnerable. Really makes himself vulnerable to the divine order, in order that we should choose, ultimately, the right choice. But the point here is, because where we're going with this is to understand how evildoers have a power. It's not a power from, there isn't plurality in this world. There's only one God, so there isn't two forces. There isn't the Godhead and the anti-Godhead, Satan, and they're battling. No, it's only one force. And if we just explain over here, it's the divine presence of God, Shekhinah, which is one with the essence of God, that God metaphorically gives an example of this is, he's the one who's giving the existence to the negative force. It's like, food gives us vitality. So God's giving us vitality. How's he doing it? Not like a mother who gives to her children food lovingly, face to face, eye to eye. The food is really an embodiment of her love. But like, you have somebody who you really hate, but you have to give them a gift for whatever reason. It's irrelevant. It's a metaphor. So you don't make eye contact with them and you kind of like throw it off the side. Yeah, here, only because I have to. So that's what the force of negativity, it's coming from God, but it's not coming from his inner desire. That's what he wants. It's coming from an external desire. External meaning it's a means to an end. Ultimately, giving that power to the negative force, that we should engage. And again, I'm adding over here because the point over here is only about the negative force, so we can understand, which we'll go tomorrow, what the beginning of our teachings was over here in this letter. Well, ultimately, the reason is that we should grapple with that negativity in order to take out the good, uplift it, and bring it to a place of holiness. And that's it for today. A lot. Powerful stuff. Yes, Gail, I would agree with you. Thank you, Clem. Seeing all right, looking to see if there are any questions. I don't see. All right, folks, sharing is caring. Please share the Alter teachings with others. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zurich and Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful day.